I was talking to a couple one time. They bought 6 acres next to a national park. It was an absolute dream for them. They had wildlife, they had trees, they had walking trails, not only on their land, but also going into the national park. Absolute dream. But over time, what they didn't realize is that there was more land available, and what they ended up getting next to them were glamping, short-term rentals, RV parks, side-by-sides. That dream just became an absolute nightmare because the peace and quiet that they had gotten used to was completely gone. And what it got me thinking about is, most people, they have this dream, they want to buy a piece of property, they want to put a cabin on it, but they get it completely wrong. They don't follow the right steps. They don't get the timing right. They pick the wrong lot, the wrong place, it's the wrong time. And then years later, just like these folks, they're stuck with a money pit that they really don't want to spend time at anymore, and nobody else really wants to buy it. And now they were left just thinking like, okay, well, how can we rent this place out? We're not going to use it anymore because we can't stand all the noise. How can we maybe turn this into an investment property for us? So now they're having to think about investments instead of the peace and quiet retirement that they were looking for. So this video is all about teaching you how to flip that script, how to identify land that is going to hold its value, how to hold it the right way, and make sure that that dream you've got doesn't end up turning into regret. And look, most land buyers, they go into it with the right intentions. They're thinking, look, we're going to buy this land, we're going to save up, we're going to build a cabin or something on it in 3 to 5 years. And they've got this sequence of events, and they find the property that's perfect for them. And now they just have to put those events into motion. But what they don't understand is that when you go into these future build properties and you have that plan, it's a completely different set of risks, and you've got to have a different type of checklist from the beginning to make sure that when you go to build that land, it's something that you actually still want to build on. When you've got this property and it's sitting there and it's money tied up in an asset, right? One of the worst things you can do is lose that momentum, and that 3 to 5 year timeline becomes a 7 to 10 year timeline. Or worse yet, what's happening around that property makes it become a property that, again, that initial use that you had wanted for it just doesn't make sense anymore. So the first part to this checklist is, number one, make sure you choose that location, not really based on where you are right now, but choose that location based on that future you. A lot of times the best location for that weekend getaway is not really a great location for that retirement home or that dream home down the road. Because where you are in life now is going to be completely different than what you evolve into 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And even if your goal is to just use it as a weekend getaway, okay, think about where you live now and where that property is, and then ask yourself, okay, where am I going to live in 10 years? Is it still in good proximity? I mean, if it's 3 hours away, I've seen people that have beautiful mountain cabin homes, just kind of that weekend home. And when they were younger, they used it quite a bit. But as they get older and the kids get older in school, and then, it becomes grandkids and things like that, even though that cabin's only about 3 hours away, they hardly ever get up there. And then another thing that pops up a lot of time is, travel fatigue again. If you're in retirement and your kids have kids and, you're going to see the grandkids and you're running all around the country doing all of this, you get travel fatigue. You don't want to go that 3 hours to the cabin anymore. And then if you've got that cabin in the woods or, down by the lake or up on a mountain, are you actually going to be able to get there when you're in your 70s and 80s? Like, look, if you're looking to have a legacy property that you can pass down to the kids and grandkids, you need to plan that out now to make sure that when you might be in a walker or something like that, you actually still have access to that property. Because right now in my early 50s, I can hike just about any trail in North America. But when I'm 80, 85, 90, God willing, I probably won't be able to get there. So when I'm planning that cabin now, I'm going to take future me into account. And another thing with future me in mind is, okay, how am I going to access healthcare? How am I going to access groceries? How am I going to do things like that? Now, it's all good, again, if it's that weekend getaway and you're going to spend maybe a week or two at most there, you can hit that grocery store on the way out of town. You can grab all your provisions and head up to the cabin. That's all good. But think about it from that healthcare perspective. Again, picture future you, and you're out there and there's some type of medical emergency. Okay. How close is that healthcare at that point? If it's a remote cabin somewhere in the woods or up in the mountains, you may be an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours from the nearest ambulance. So by the time they get to you and then get you to a hospital, it may be 4 or 5 hours in that time since you first called them. And then the other part of having that right location is, in 5 years, in 10 years, what's going to be around you? You can usually find some zoning maps, and if it's unrestricted and that's what you want, okay, that's great. But understand that If there's another parcel next to you on both sides and then another parcel after that, if it's unrestricted, not only can you do whatever you want to do, but those people next to you can do whatever they want to do. So if they want to put in a motocross track, if they want to put in glamping or short-term rentals or an RV park or whatever, you really don't have a lot of say against that as long as they follow all the rules within that county. So make sure you're understanding where you're buying land. And a lot of times, case in point, you're buying land out of state. So make sure that you have somebody on the ground in that state that you trust. I mean, if you're buying in Texas, call me. I can take care of you most places in Central Texas. And if I can't take care of you because you're further outside of that, I've got agents that I can refer you to that do this type of work all the time. Same thing in other states. I've got agents and builders and lenders and stuff all around the U.S. Most states, I can put you in contact with somebody that is local on the ground and experienced. So if you're looking somewhere that you don't currently live and you need those local assets, let me know. Because those local assets, they have the ability to save your butt and keep you out of a lot of trouble. And on that point, a real strategic tip for most buyers is at the county level, you're usually going to be able to find some type of forecast of growth, maybe potential zoning changes and things like that. A lot of times they'll call them like transportation master plans and stuff like that. So if you can find that at the county that you're looking in or in the area that you're looking, take a look at those forecasts and see that piece of property that you're looking at. Are other people going to be building there? Because there's going to be a lot of growth out there because infrastructure and utilities are pushing out that direction. And again, if you can't find that, find those local resources who can help you out. The second part in that checklist is make sure that you understand seasonal changes in that property. Again, if you live nearby to that area, you probably understand everything that there is to know about it. But if you're looking in another part of the same state or in another state altogether, what you may not know is as you're walking that property in April and it looks perfect, in November you may not have access to it because it's completely covered in snow. And I know that seems a little bit basic and you're like, well, Chris, of course it's covered in snow. It's up in the mountains. I'm not planning on using it up there. Okay. But some mountain properties that are covered in snow are still accessible in November and other ones aren't. It depends on who maintains those roads. Case in point, in Colorado where I look a lot, if you're surrounded on three sides and all the way down this access road by federal lands, and that access road is a park road, well, the federal government's not going to come out there and clean the snow off of that thing. But if it's a county road or even a privately maintained road with other neighbors, you may still have access, but you're not going to know that unless you A, visit with neighbors, or B, talk to the county. Maybe even your realtor or your builder up there will know, is that road passable year-round, or are you just going to have seasonal access to it? And another thing, like again here in Central Texas, if you're walking that property in August, September, October, may look fine, but in March, April, and May, there may be a huge flood risk there, and you may not even have access to that property in certain parts of the U.S. because in the rainy season, that road may be covered with water for 2 to 3 months at a time. Again, local assets on the ground where you're looking, crucial, absolutely crucial. So real quick checkpoint for that, talk to people about snowfall. Who's going to clean it? Talk to them about flooding. And if your assets locally, really don't know, or, you're not working with anybody locally, give the fire department a call. Local fire departments usually know which roads are clear, when they're clear, which roads flood, how much rain it takes to flood those roads. Your local fire departments are a huge asset to you on the ground. The other thing you're going to want to do when you're looking at these property is check slopes and the grades and stuff like that on this property. If you've got a slope that's greater than 10%, it's going to be a lot more expensive, not only for your foundation, but it's going to be a lot harder to put in utilities. And anytime you say a lot harder, that equals to a lot more expensive. And the other thing that's going to have to happen if it's a really steep slope and you're having to put in stem walls and things like that, is now you're going to have to bring in additional engineering or get additional engineering work done, which again equals higher costs. So make sure you understand the basic things up front, like, okay, is it going to be expensive to build on that site? And from the get-go, you don't necessarily need to engage with an engineering company. Builders in that area, again, local builders, they're going to know, hey, yes, on sites like this, and you can walk the site ahead of time with a builder. If you call a builder, you'll be able to get them to go out and meet you out there. But they're going to be able to tell you, yep, on a site like this, we're going to have to bring in this kind of engineering. We're going to have to do this for the septic system. If you want below ground electricity, it's going to cost you this much per foot. Your builders, again, just like your firefighters, your local builders are going to be able to answer a lot of those questions up front. So again, have those local assets on the ground. And then again, I've already mentioned this a couple of times, but who's going to take care of road maintenance? Make sure you're seeing the agreements in place. If it's not a publicly maintained road, it could be a group of 10 neighbors that maintain that road. Your first indication is if you're on that road and it's rutted out and it's torn up and it's hard to get across, okay, that may be a privately maintained road. We need to find out if there's a shared access agreement, a shared maintenance agreement. What are the steps to get that road cleaned up, make it a little bit more passable? A lot of times, if there's a shared access agreement and there's 7 or 8 neighbors that are on it, well, if they don't want to spend the money or the time to smooth that road out, you may be stuck doing it yourself. And then the last point on this part is, I've mentioned the fire department, I've mentioned the local builders, and even local realtors and local lenders will know this a lot. Just ask them a simple question. Would any of these issues cause you to tell one of your family members, nope, do not buy this property, it's going to be a headache? When you put it in terms like that, that's when you get real answers from people. The next part of the checklist is make sure you know what your holding costs are. Holding land isn't free. Even if you pay it off in cash, in most states, you are going to have property taxes. Okay, so even at that point, the longer you hold it, the more expensive it's going to get for you. So again, going back to that, do you have a 3 to 5 year time frame? Okay, know up front how much it's going to cost you to maintain that property. And it's not only all about property taxes, or if you've got a loan out on that land, paying that principal and interest, but also if you're removed, if you're in a different state, you may want to talk to an insurance broker about getting some liability coverage for that land, just in case somebody's on the road and decides that they want to wander onto your property because they think that they see an amazing view and they want to take a selfie, and they're out there on the edge of a cliff and they fall off and, good scenario, just break a leg or something. Okay, well, crap, even though they weren't supposed to be on your property, they were on your property because you as a property owner, you did not have it, roped off or fenced off, or you didn't have enough signs visible. We're in a litigious society, so it's probably going to be worth your while to talk to an insurance broker about situations like that. Anyway, long way around talking that it's not cheap to hold property. It can get really expensive. And going back to property taxes for a second, one of the other things about property taxes is, you know what they are up front, but in a lot of states, property taxes will continue to go up if the state says that that property is worth more and more from year to year. That's typically what happens with land. That's the reason a lot of people think it's a good investment, is because you usually see pretty steady appreciation over time. Okay, well, in most states, the state's not going to let you get away with that appreciation without taking their little cut of the pie. So understand, again, talk to those local resources and figure out, okay, how much do property taxes go up from year to year normally? And I know we've got high parts of the market, we've got low parts, we've got parts where it's flat. But again, if you can look back and get a history of the property taxes for that, and you might be able to find those on government websites, but if you can find a history of the property taxes on that website, it could give you an idea of what they typically appreciate at every year, how much they go up, and you can calculate that in ahead of time. Then the other one is the property you have may be in an HOA. Okay, well, you've got to calculate that in. Again, that's pretty easy to figure out, but make sure you're taking that into account. And then the other thing is maintenance. A lot of people buy a piece of property and they're like, oh, we're just going to camp on it on weekends until we build our cabin in 3 to 5 years. Okay, that's fine. But who's going to maintain that property? Are you going to maintain that property when you go out and camp on it on weekends? Because usually when I camp, I want to relax. I don't want to be out swinging a chainsaw or an axe or, have a brush hog going or whatever. So are you going to pay people to maintain that property? If so, what do they charge? If you've got 15 acres that you have to mow, that's pretty expensive, all right? So maybe your holding costs include going and buying a tractor and a shredder, okay? Or maybe your holding costs include finding that maintenance company that will take care of it for you. But again, regardless, you have to know what that number is up front. One key word of caution if you're looking in Texas, and I think there's other states that do this as well. So in Texas, we've got things like ag valuation, wildlife valuation. And what that does is it's a special valuation that the state allows if you've got agriculture in place, cows, sheep, goats, horses, whatever. Even if you're planting crops, you can get an ag valuation and it reduces your property tax burden. Texas also has a wildlife valuation that you can move that ag valuation into. Every year you have to do certain things to provide some type of benefit to wildlife. Okay, now you can plant plants for bees. You can feed deer. You can put up brush piles for different types of animals. You can get rid of coyotes or bobcats. You can even take census of wildlife that's out there, whether it's songbirds or deer, whatever. Anyway, my point being is that you can have a wildlife valuation in Texas too, and again, it reduces that tax burden. But if you let that ag valuation or that wildlife valuation lapse, in other words, you don't keep it up in the state's eyes, they will take that away and you may have your taxes go up 80% from one year to the next. It can be a huge, huge cost if you let that valuation lapse. So if there's rules like that in that local area that you're not familiar with, make sure you understand them going into. Again, in a state like Texas, I'm a great resource for that. In other states, you need to find out if they have rules like that in place. And again, if you don't have the people on the ground in that state, let me know. I can put you in contact with them. The fourth part of this checklist, and another thing that you've got to have in your mind, you've got to have this as a part of your plan before you start looking for land, is you really need to have a realistic timeline and you have a realistic idea about what the costs of building are. Again, goes back to local assets. Builders are a great resource for this, but local lenders are also. Local lenders know because they give loans for construction, so they can give you a pretty good idea of what they're seeing in terms of build costs. But here's a pretty good little tip for you, and I have people talk about this all the time. Hey, we're gonna build when the prices come down. I hate to tell you, but there's only been one time since I've been alive that I've seen the cost of building materials come down. And that was during COVID when everything went up and got expensive for building materials, they settled back down. But outside of that, I haven't seen building materials actually get cheaper over time, and labor is the exact same way. Labor does not get cheaper because everything around us is getting more expensive. Groceries are more expensive, gas is more expensive, and the same people that are building your house or your cabin, they're going to the same grocery store as you are, so they're not going to take less money when everything else is getting more expensive. Keep that in mind if you're just tempted to say, you know what, it's too expensive to build right now, I'm going to wait until it gets cheaper. A better thing to say would be, you know what I want to build is too expensive. Hey, Mr. Builder, let's work together and figure out a way to bring these costs down to get me what I still want, but maybe do the construction in a cheaper manner. And just because you're thinking about doing construction in a cheaper manner, it doesn't mean you're going to get less of a product in the end. You may just have to substitute some materials out or use a method of building that goes a little bit faster so that you don't have as many man hours tied up in it. And you can even start planning for this before you approach a builder or a lender. I mean, you can look online and you can track building material costs. There's indexes that show you all of that stuff. And there's even indexes that are like county specific in some places and state specific just about everywhere. Find out what building costs are and look at the last 5 years or 10 years in that area and see what's happened to them over time. Again, we know 5 years ago we had COVID and you saw this giant escalation in building costs. Well, do what I do with real estate costs and just kind of chop that part out of it and keep that steady growth going. And you could project out to see what that cost is going to look like. Because just because you can build for $300 a foot right now when you buy the land, in 3 to 5 years, that number is going to be more expensive, so you've got to plan ahead. And the other thing I mentioned on this is timeline. Make sure you've got a realistic timeline. Resources, I know I say it all the time, and I know it's beaten into your head at this point, but make sure you have those people in place. You can go to a builder and say, hey, how long is a permitting timeline? How long does it take to get septic put in? How long does it take, what's the lead time on a well? What's the lead time on getting electric to this place? Understanding what it looks like in that local area and how long it's going to take you to build. Again, you've got holding costs associated with that land. Once you start construction on a property, you're going to be paying an interest-only construction loan that you pay out over time, right? It depends on what's in place. When you put the foundation up, they're going to take a draw for foundation. When you get it framed and put a roof on it, they're going to take a draw for framing and roofing. Depending on the builder, you might have 5 or 6 different draws, but every time you make a draw from the lender, that payment's going to go up. But here's the kicker. If you're building somewhere like Colorado where you can only build for 5 or 6 months out of the year, okay, they're going to start building in May and they're going to have to stop building in October. Well, when everything is iced in and you're going through the winter, getting back to that next May so that builder can start again, your costs don't stop accruing. You're still making those monthly payments to the lender. They've given you money. You've got it sitting on the ground as a partially finished house. They want those payments. Again, you have to know what that timeline is up front. How long are you going to have to carry those costs? Again, this is you working with the lender, working with the builder, having an idea of what they've seen before. And it's never a perfect, seamless piece of the transaction. It's never going to be perfect. Just because a builder tells you, hey, it's going to take me 16 months because I'm only going to be able to work 5 months out of the year. Okay, he can tell you that, but what if the next winter is really, really long and cold and he can only work 3 months that year? Now that 18 months may turn into 25 months because he's got to wait until the following spring to finish up. You can't really get mad at him. He can't control Mother Nature, right? But you need to have contingencies in place just in case that happens. Now, in most places, that's probably not going to happen, but just in case if I'm a smart buyer, I want to know up front. And then one other quick tip on working with lenders. The lenders that I work with, it's a 12-month period. If the construction takes longer than that, you're going to have to get an extension. That extension may end up costing you more money in terms of interest rate because you're going to have to get that extension in a different environment than when you got that loan up front. And the other thing is, just because you qualify for a construction loan up front when you buy the property, if your idea is, hey, I'm going to build 3 to 5 years later, you may not qualify the same way you did up front. One of the worst things that I see happen is somebody has a great paying job and they buy that land, but then they retire, and now they're down to, their retirement income, and the retirement income is not going to allow them to build the same house that they could have before retirement. So you've got to plan that stuff out ahead of time. Talk to your financial advisor. Make sure that you're taking those things into account when you're doing this planning piece of it. The fifth part of this checklist is shifting your mind frame to understand that you're not an owner when you're buying land, okay? You're a land steward at that point. Everything that you do on that land, this land here that I'm on, everything that was done prior to me getting here has affected me. So everything that you do on your land is going to affect your children. It's going to affect your grandchildren. It might affect future buyers of that property. So you've got to shift your mindset from, I bought a piece of property and I want to do X, Y, and Z, to I bought a piece of property, I would like to do this. What is that going to look like 15, 20, 30 years from now, either when I'm no longer around or if I have to get out of this property and I've got to sell it? And thinking from a legacy property standpoint, passing it on to your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, okay, that's a little bit easier because you've raised your kids, they raised your grandkids. You probably have pretty similar ideas about, what you want to do with that property. And you know what? If you're lucky, you're probably going to be designing that property with your kids and you're getting their input along the way. But the crucial thing is having a plan for what happens if you have to sell that property. Okay? What happens if you have to sell it in 2 years before you've started building and you've been clearing and setting things up in a certain way, but now you've got to get out of it quickly, and maybe what you've done doesn't necessarily translate for the next buyer? How do you mitigate the risk of having to sell that property before you wanted to and making sure that it's actually palatable and it's something that's desirable for other buyers? And that's kind of the unthinkable, right? Nobody wants to think about having to sell their property. So, if you've gone through and you've analyzed and you've studied and you've made all these plans, you hate to have to get rid of it before you see your dream come out of it. So what happens if you're in a financial situation that becomes difficult? All right, well, maybe that property has got different ways to pay for itself. Okay, is it a recreation property that, maybe you can put in 5 or 6 RV spots and have people rent out weekends there? Or maybe you can open it up to camping just to raise money to pay the bills if you've got a sudden illness or something like that. So being able to think ahead and contingency plan, right? It's all about contingency planning and making sure that, all the time, effort, and money that you've put into this so you don't lose that unexpectedly. The other thing you're going to want to do from that steward standpoint is make sure that you're collecting your documentation and saving that along the way. Okay, surveys are the bare minimum. Floor plans drawn up for a house or design plans for a house, keep those. If you have to sell that property, that house may be desirable to somebody else. Even if you haven't built it, you might be able to sell, what they call papered land. And it's something that you've got a specific house design on that land. It takes into account the view, takes into account the topography and everything else that could be desirable for a future buyer. So make sure you save those plans. Any type of land development that you're planning out, sketch it out, keep those things, because I can tell you one thing, a lot of people don't have the same vision that I have when it comes to land or when it comes to siting a house on land. So if you have that same ability and you can see this vision and you can sketch it out, again, if you have to sell that land and you can put that vision in somebody else's mind, it may make it easier to get rid of. And then the last part of stewardship, and this goes back to kind of originally buying, before you buy the land, really looking at the land, okay? Avoid quirky land. We all kind of like quirky things in our own quirky way, but trust me, the quirks that I like are not the same quirks that you like. And again, if we're having to plan for future people to use it, just because you love the fact that that land slopes off and you've got these massive views and you don't care if there's no yard around it, if you have to sell that property, the buyer pool just shrank. Because some people are going to want the ability to get out off of the decks and out of the house and utilize the land around the property. You may have 15 acres that you really can't do anything with, but you bought it because you've got these amazing, huge views. Well, somebody else may not want to maintain 15 acres if they can't really use it, and their idea of use isn't really hiking up and down a hill nonstop that's got a 25-degree slope on it. And kind of summarizing that point, if as a buyer you can treat that property as a legacy, whether there's a house or a cabin or whatever on it or raw land, keeping it buildable, keeping it in shape that if a buyer were to come there, they can see their vision there clearly, documenting it in a way that makes sure that future buyers can potentially see themselves on it. The goal is to have the land usable regardless of what the future situation ends up being. So as you're making the improvements or, bringing your vision to life, the question to kind of keep in the back of your mind is, okay, if I do this, will this make the land more valuable 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And would somebody else find this valuable also? Now, I'm not telling you to get rid of your dream and build something based on what everybody else wants. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you to consider as you're doing this that your dream may not always come to fruition, so keep that little voice in the back of your head that says, will this make this property more valuable? Because at the end of the day, smart buyers don't just buy a piece of property and hope for the best and just put something on there without thinking about it, all right? They research, they plan, and they plan meticulously. And they hold that land in a way that's gonna keep it flexible, for whatever the future might hold, even beyond their plans. They're gonna keep that land safe, and they're gonna keep that land in a manner that when the moment's right, they can pull the trigger and make that dream come true.